Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're on Masechtas Zevachim daf Nun Daled. We're going to begin on Nun Daled Amud Aleph, the third line from the top, Meisvei. So we're learning in yesterday's daf that when it comes to the Mizbeach, we have the Yesod, which is the bottom level of the Mizbeach. However, it only covered part of it. As you can see in this diagram on the bottom of Nid Gimel Beis, you can see that the Yesod which was in the chelik of Binyamin. It says Yesod Binyamin. So it went all the way up the northern side as well as the western side. However, it did go in just an amma to the south and just an amma to the east. However, there was no Yesod, there was no base for the southeastern corner, and this is because it needed to be built in the Chelik Binyamin. However, the Gemara, as we saw, there was actually using the language of the Gemara, there was a Ritzua Haisiyatz Mechelko Shehuda V'Nichneses Bechelko Shel Binyamin. There was a tiny little strip that actually went into the Chelik of Binyamin, but it was actually Yehuda. Now, it's necessary that the Yesod has to be in the portion of Binyamin. But this section, the southeastern part of the Mizbeach, actually belonged to Yehuda. And therefore, because of that, we weren't able to have a Yesod. So that was the conflict between the two. But nonetheless, that's the reason why, because it was necessary that it has to be in the chelik of Yehuda. The chelik of Binyamin. And the southeast was in the chelik of Yehuda. Okay, the southeast. Good. Meisvei. So, Oilas Ha'of, when it comes to the Oilas Ha'of, Kates Ahis Anasis. Exactly how did we bring this ola? So hayamoylikis rosha mu'ul or pa. So we know that when it comes to a bird, instead of shchita, we do malika, which we penetrate through the back of its head. Umavdil, and it's separated. Umamatza dama el kir hamizbech. And then we squeeze out its blood onto the wall of the Mizbech. Now, if you want to tell me that the southeastern corner, as we established, does not have anything there, so Bavir Ba'alma Hudika Avid. It's kind of hard to understand. It's actually, the blood is falling basically onto the ground. Says Rashi, V'i Eno Yesod Nimsa Kashu Moilka Ba'avir Haya Nimlaka V'Hadam Naifel Aretz Le'ibud. It's just like falling down there. So Rashi says, well, maybe it fell on the soivev, which is the level above it. Anyway, so this is the kasha. So the answer is, Hisnu, so they stipulated Avir de Binyamin Karka de Yehuda. Even though it's true that the land belonged to Yehuda, and that's why there couldn't be a sod there, but the airspace still belonged to Binyamin. So what? So the point is that it was caught by some type of mechanism, and therefore, because of that, it was acceptable. So that's basically how we answer this. Says Rashi, even though the blood was caught there, but it was above 3, and therefore it's not considered to be karka. So also kamin balita, it was like some type of protrusion. Katana keneged oisai karen, the kabel dam oil sa'of. It caught the blood, so yipol aretz. You're right. We didn't want it to fall into the ground. Therefore, it was considered to be like kir mizbech. Avol yisoid lo mikri. It's not considered to be yisoid lo hachsher hakaren lo matan damim hatzrichin li keneli yisoid. Shein yisoid el ham yisoid ba'aretz. So again, this would have hit the ground. But the din is that what they did, they had some type of item they actually caught it, some type of protrusion connected that Karen. And therefore, the fact that it landed in this protrusion, that was considered to be the Avir when the Chelka bin Yamin. Okay, so Milo Havi Lo Yisod. So what exactly does it mean that we've been saying that the southeastern corner has no Yisod? There's like nothing there. So Rabbi and Rabbi Binyan, the Mamish wasn't built. It's just there was like this empty space over there. So Levi Omer no Badamim. There was the Yisod. It's just that because it was not in the Chelek ben Yamin, so you just couldn't put the dam there halachically. But there was the same Yisod like all the way around. You're not allowed to apply the dam there because it was in the Chelek ben Yamin. So fine. So that's an interesting dispute, which it's not that there was a separate, it was different. It was just that you can't do the dam application there. Okay, so Ramatar game biach santia yisvani midbacha. So he explains that basically it was the binyan itself. In his portion, the Mizbeach was built. Levi Matar game, so that's how Rav explains it, and therefore basically saying that there was nothing there. There was no Yisod at all. However, Levi Matar game ba'achsantia yismei v'kadsha. It just means you can't sanctify putting the dam there, but there really is a Yisod. Makam makudish ladamim, a place which is set for blood. So Tashma. So we're now going to try to ascertain if we can figure out who we should hold like. Hayasoid hayim halich al pnei kol tzafin v'al pnei kol marav. So the Yisod went all the way to the north and to the west. Okay, so you can, again, as we see in this picture, the Yisod was all the entire north and the entire west. You can also see, again in the picture on the previous Amud, that the Alma, the Yisod, also went an Alma here in the south and an Alma here in the east. So it did, and then the rest of it, apparently there was nothing there, at least according to that visual. So my oichel was mean it took up space. Nami bedamim. Maybe it just means that you can't put dam there, but really there was really a yisod. So my oichel nami bedamim. So you're saying it could just mean pashut that there was a yisod there, but just again you can't put dam on that. So it's not a ra either way. Tashma hamizbeach hayashloishim v'shtayim. Which is mashma again, that sounds like it was 32 by 32 is a perfect square, and therefore that apparently shows that Kash and Rav, the fact that it's square, it must be that, again, how could Rav say it was bebinyan, that it wasn't, that part of it was cut off? It's not true, it was square, so obviously there was the yisod. So Hakamaskinan minat sad. Says Rashi, La ba'arbas revoyin kachashiv. When I say 32 by 32, it just means the side. In other words, the northern side was 32. The northern side was 32. The west side was 32 almost. But it doesn't mean that it was 32 all around. Okay, Tashma. Nimsa payrech alma al yisaid ve'alma al soivev. So we find that it literally flew out an alma onto the side, the amal soivev, because the way that it was, the dimensions, which this Rashi explains, is that the Yisod was 32 by 32, right? And then you had the soivev, which was 30 by 30. So therefore, it went out on each side an alma, right? So ema keneged alma yisaid the alma soviv. So again, it doesn't necessarily mean that on all sides there was a yisait. Tashma, the tiny Levi, Ketzad Bainanes HaMizbeach. So how did the Mizbeach actually get built? This is a very fascinating depiction of how practically the Mizbeach HaChitzon was made. So Mavian Milvan Shu Shloishim Mishtayim al Shloishim Mishtayim. They took like a form, like a wooden frame, 32 by 32, which again seems like the whole thing was that way, and therefore the Yesod Taka existed over there. The Goyba Alma, it was high in Alma from the ground. Maybe Chaluke Avonim Mefulmus, and they would put these some type of stones, rushes, like some type of tablet of some sort. Bain Gedoylois, Bain Katanos. It didn't matter what they were. There could have been big, some were smaller. Umevian Sid, Vekunya Vizefes, Umam Chavashayvich. So basically, they took all these different materials, lime, lead, and tar, and they smeared and poured it all over those rocks so that it became all hardened and one platform. V'zehu, some people don't write the word makoim yesod, right? So that's the yesod, which again seems to imply that there was a yesod all the way around. And then it continues. V'chayzu maybe malvin shehu shloishim amal shloishim amal. The first was 32 by 32. For the soivev, it was 30 by 30. The goybe chamish amos was much higher. The first one was only 1 amma high. This is 5 amos high. Well, maybe chaluke avanim chulu, right? So they did the same thing. They put these types of stones, and then they put the lime and the lead and the tar. So it's almost like a wedding cake with different tiers. If lahavdil, you can compare it to that. Maybe milvin shu chav chesal chav chesama. So you can see again, it was 20. It was 32, then 30, and then 28. But gava gimel amos. So the yesod was only 1. Then you had 5, then 3. So the very top is 9. Maybe chalukichul. V'hu makom hamaracha. So that's the top where we would put the fires. V'chayzu maybe malbin shehu ama alma. Maybe chaluki avanim mafulmus ben gedolos ben katanos. Again, I'm not sure why it doesn't say v'chul here. But regarding the kronos on all 4 corners, which were an alma by alma, we did the same thing. Or maybe zefes or kunyo mamcha v'shayfach v'zehu karen. That's the corners. V'chein l'chol karen v'karen. That's what we did for all the 4 corners around. So you had the alma, the saviv, and then the next level for the maracha, and then you had the kronos on all 4 sides. So this seems pretty clear that there was a yesod. We just may not have used it for damim. As we continue to Nun Daled Mud Beis, the guy is lay. Maybe they actually cut out, so it was poured that way, but then they cut that part out. So maybe Taka, there was no yesod at all on the southeast. They started that way, but then they cut it out afterwards. Avonim shleimus ksiv. It says it has to be avonim shleimus. And Rashi says without any pegimois. So apparently it's a rise. When it says the machas midi matutai, they placed wooden beams on the inside, b'shakale, and then they took it out. Right. So basically, they almost put some type of even though it was this outer shell, but they also put on the outside, or the outside part, like a piece of wood, so that even though everything was all good, but now it was separated, so they were able to then take that part off, which didn't affect the avanim. There were still avanim shleimois. V'shakale. Diyote mahachi, because you don't say this, hadiyam Rav Kahana, avanim shel kranois, the stones of the corners, chalulos hayu, they had holes in it. Dersiv umalu kimizra kizavius. It was like a bowl. So mizbech. So achanami avanim shleimus amrachmana. So you can ask the same kasha. How could it be by the kronos that apparently it wasn't whole? So ella demachas midi matutai, that they put sticks into it, the shakale, and then they took them out. Achanami demachas midi matutai v'shakale. So it's possible it could have started off that way, but then they were able to remove that part. Dorish Rav, Siv, what does it mean in the pasuk? And let's look at this pasuk over here, which is in Sefer Shmuel. But David Barach, it says David ran away. which is much of his life. V'yamolet v'yavoy el Shmuel haramasa. So he encountered Shmuel, the prophet. V'yaglois kol asher asa lo Shaul. He told him everything that transpired with the king Shaul. V'yelchu, he went. U'Shmuel v'yeshvu b'noyos, which is different ways of reading it. V'yigad l'Shaul lemor hini David b'noyos b'Rama. So he is in this particular place. Okay, so what's going on over here? So it's Vayelech David u'Shmuel. So David was together with Shmuel. It says V'yeshu b'Navios b'Rama. So V'chima inyan Navios etzel Rama. These are two separate cities. So where were they sitting? And what were they doing there? El Shahaya Yoshim b'Rama. They actually were in this place Rama, which is the makom of where Shmuel Hanavi resided. The Oyiskin benuya shel oyim, but they were engaged in the discussion of the beauty of the world. That's what the word refers to, namely the binyan Beis Hamikdash. David HaMelech was trying to contemplate exactly the proper location of where the Beis Hamikdash should be constructed. Amri Ksiv, the pasuk says, "V'kamtev l'Yisrael makom," you go up. Mamash Beis Hamikdash gavoa mikol Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael gavoa mikol Ratzos. It's more in Kedushin as well. So we know it's supposed to be at the highest level. So Lohaya Yadai de Kavasi Hecha. They didn't know what exactly does that mean. Where exactly is the highest place? So I see Sefer Yeshua. So they were studying the Sefer Yeshua. But Kuluksiv, in all of Sefer Yeshua, it says the following. Let's get these psukim down. There's actually a lot of psukim here. It says Vatar Hagvul Meroy Shahar. So they were discussing the boundaries at the top of the mountain. El Mayin Me Neftoach V'yatza El Arei Har Afron Vatar Hagvul Ba'alwa Hikirius Yeroyim V'natzav Hagvul Mabal Yom El Har Seir V'yavre El Katef Har Yarim, etc., etc. So it goes through all of the boundaries of that are stipulated over in the Sefer Yeshua. And it says over there, eventually, it says the word Vayered. Where do I see that in the pasuk? V'yatza hagvul, v'tar hagvul, sivna v'avra hagvul. Okay, so it says somewhere that it went down and went up. Okay, so hagvul, v'tar hagvul, and they turned. The boundary turned. So B'Sheva Binyamin, when it came to discussion of the Sheva Binyamin, of his portion, it says V'oluksiv. It says that he went up. V'yord luksiv. But when it came to the Chelik of Binyamin, it doesn't say anything about going down. So we can actually see now a link that the Chelik of Binyamin is something linked to being in a high place. And therefore, as we know, that the Beis Hamikdash was in the Chelik of Binyamin for the most part, except part of it, as we said, was this corner was in the Chelik of Yehuda. So Amr Shemamina Hacha Huda Mim Kaimoi. It must be, since all the other places say up and down, but when it comes to Sheva Binyamin only mentions going up, that must be the place where the Beis Hamikdash should be built. So Savar Lebnimi B'Ain Itom. They looked at the highest place. Actually, let's look at this Rashi. I see Sefer Yeshua lived like Bigvul Hashvatim. They want to look at all the portions. V'lo pirshu sham be'achas mikol shvatim pe'os k'volehim l'arba ruchei sehen chutz m'shev Yehuda Binyamin. The only two shvatim that mention like all of its boundaries was the portions of Shevet Yehuda and Binyamin. By Gevul Yehuda, it talks about the southern part of Eretz Yisrael, and Eretz Edom was the Gevul. Ba'oirech Gevul Yehuda min Mizrach Amarav Yam HaMelech Yam Gevul Amarav, right? So Yam HaGadol, the Mediterranean on the west, the Yam HaTichon, the Yam HaMelech, the Dead Sea on the east, right? So it goes into all that. However, when it comes to the Chelik Binyamin, it doesn't mention anything about going down. So it certainly must be talking, therefore, should be built in the Shevet of Binyamin. So therefore, maybe it should be built in Ein Etom. Ein Etom was the highest location, and therefore it makes sense, and that's where the Beis Hamikdash should be built. The medal, because again it's raised up. So Amri Nisni Bei Kolil. let's actually lower it a drop, even though that is the highest place. Let's instead put it a little bit lower. Says Rashi, Nasa Oisu Namuch Ma'at. Let's put the Beis HaMikdash a little bit lower in that area. And V'nivnu b'Yerushalayim shehi lamata. Even though Yerushalayim is not the highest, but nonetheless it's okay. And K'diksiv Kseifa v'Luksiv Roishai. It says Vein Kseifa Shachin, that the Shechina, where the Beis HaMikdash should be on the shoulders, which means the shoulders are a pretty high part of the body, but the head is higher. It's basically alluding to the fact that the Beis HaMikdash does not have to be on the absolute highest place, but basically one of the highest locations. And therefore, based on that, they understood that it should not be on built at Ein Itom, but a little bit lower in Yerushalayim. K'diksiv, Uvein Kseifav Shochein, V'boy Seima. Alternatively, Gemiri de Sanhedrin Bechelka Yehuda. It was understood that the Sanhedrin is supposed to be in the Chelka of Yehuda because he represents Malchus and leadership and decision making, and the Shechina Bechelka Binyamin. As we said before, the Shechina is in the Chelka Binyamin. Now, the Medalinan lay, if we would actually lift it up, that the Beis HaMikdash should be in this location of Ein Itom, then Mispalig Tuva, then it would be a big distance, a big gap. Motiv, this to be Porta, better that it should go down a little bit lower, K'diksiv of Sheichein. So that is the other logic as why. Says Rashi, so it's the tradition is that Sanhedrin was in the Chelka Binyamin, K'diksiv, and that's referring to the rulers, which is Shevet Yehuda. Okay, so therefore they understood that if they would put it on this other location, so then it would be very far, because even though the Beis HaMikdash is in the Chel Binyamin, but Chel Yehuda, which is the Sanhedrin, would have been pretty far away. And we know that the Sanhedrin and Gadol should actually be located in the Beis HaMikdash. We have in the Lishkas HaGazas. So it makes sense that the Chelek Yehuda, which is also connected closely to in the Beis HaMikdash, is where the Sanhedrin should be, but it would only make sense if it's in that location, Yerushalayim, where Chelek of Yehuda, there is some of that portion. That's the idea behind it. Yaldavar zeh niskana doyeg hadaimi b'David. Of course, good old Doeg, he was a very violent person, and he wished to show jealousy toward David HaMelech. K'diksiv kikinas beisecha achaltani, because the jealous of your house has consumed me. K'diksiv zachar Shem David es kol an oisai, that Hashem remembers all of the afflictions. Asher nishma Hashem b'gomer. So im ava b'oihel beisi. So if he comes into my house, im etain chnas le'enai lafapoi, that I'm going to end up be taking sleep from my eyelids. Tenmuna ad emsa makum Hashem, to be able to find the place of the mikdash. Tini shamnua be'afrasa mitsanua b'stei yaher. Be'afrasa ze Yoshua, the ka'asim Ephraim. That's referring to Yoshua, who comes from the Shevet of Ephraim. Mitsanua b'stei yaher ze Binyamin dechse Binyamin zoyev yitra. That the wolf is like the wolf in the forest. Okay, we'll stop here and let's maybe see a couple questions. Question 7. Let's just look at this. Question 6. Be'ezek Karen Lohayoli Side. We know that's the southeast, and that's also the Makoim of the Oyel Sa'of is also in the southeast. Exactly how was that done, was we already discussed. Question 7. Matam Shlo Banu Asabes Mitzvah Bein Eitom. Even though it's the highest place, higher than Yerushalayim. So one is because it says Vink Sefer Shachin. And the fact is, it's a Rosho. It's mashma that the Makam Beis HaMikdash should be a little bit lower. Also, the Sanhedrin is a Chelek of Yehuda, and it was at Ein Itom. It was built, the Beis HaMikdash there, which would be far away from the Gvul of Yehuda, then the Sanhedrin would end up being far away, right? And that's not a good idea, right? We wanted the Sanhedrin in the border of Yehuda. So therefore, the only way you could do that is by having the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim and not at Ein Itum. Okay, let's maybe see another question. It's a good question. They don't want you to just give it away. So Ein Itam. So it says Mein Pi Naftoach. Rashi brings down. We didn't build it there because the Sefer Shachin or the Sanhedrin was the Chelk ben Yamin, the Shechina was the Chelk ben Yamin, and if it was built there, then the Sanhedrin would be very far from the Makom Shechina, which we did not want. Okay. Question TB6. Okay, forget that. TB8 rather. Tanman es chaza tenufa b'makom tar kadosh. Doesn't look like we have anything on this daf. Ad kan.